Happy Halloween, everyone. It has been a minute, but I am back with a review video for you. So every year I like to pick a horror franchise that I maybe have some gaps in, put a poll up on our It's a Wonderful Podcast Patreon, and ask you guys which horror franchise I should watch for spooky season. So all throughout this month, I've been watching the movies from what won the poll, and that was the Evil Dead franchise. Now, I had pretty much seen every movie in this franchise except Army of Darkness. And it actually had been a while since I'd seen the first two original films. So I was really excited to delve back into this franchise. Friend to the show, Brandon Hanna, is a huge fan of the Evil Dead franchise and the character of Ash Williams. So that was another thing, just really getting me excited to finally watch Army of Darkness. So this is going to be a big review, talking all 5 films in the franchise. So let's just get right into it. So the series kicked off in 1981, directed by Sam Raimi. This was a super low budget film, and it is set with this cabin in the woods, a group of friends, Ash, his sister, his girlfriend, his friend Scotty, and Scotty's girlfriend all go up to this rickety cabin in the woods. And let's talk about Scotty for a minute, because you know, how does he not ever come up in those conversations about the most annoying horror characters? Because he's kind of an asshole. He is the reason all of this happens. He's reading from the book. People are asking him not to read from it, that it's making them uncomfortable, and he doesn't care. He continues to read from the book. And when people start getting all crazy and possessed and demonic, he doesn't care. He's just out for himself. So add him to the list of shitty movie characters, because Scotty was getting on my last nerve. Considering this movie was so low budget, Sam Raimi really managed to get some excellent shots. Great use of kind of fog for atmosphere, the headlights of the car lending to lighting to really play up the blood and gore. You know, we have blood kind of splattering on the camera and then using like a red tinted lens, so that really plays into all of the horror gore of what is happening. I mean, I will say the face makeup isn't great, but you know, you have to take into consideration that small budget. But the other kind of makeup and effects I think looked pretty good, considering just kind of how cheaply this movie had to be made. I love that zooming shot of your entity kind of going through the woods, which would become a staple of these demonic deadite spirits throughout the whole franchise. So I love that this kind of very interesting shot and effect made popular in this very first movie would be something that would be a staple of the franchise going throughout, because you know, we do get our typical things happening in each film that pay homage to that first movie, but they do them in kind of different ways. So I like that this is kind of the one consistent thing, or one of the most consistent things throughout every film in the franchise. It also adds some character in terms of what we're dealing with, kind of this looming presence. So I really thought that that was a cool shot to really set up kind of the villain of these films, the Evil Dead, as it were.
Estrada.
yeah, very simple story. One by one, our characters are getting possessed, leaving Ash to kind of be our final guy. So I like that we kind of get the most character stuff with him, while the characters aren't incredibly fleshed out. I still like that we are left with Bruce Campbell. He has a lot of presence. He's easy on the eyes, so I like that he's kind of our last guy standing in this. I do like that there's some relationships set up for him, so that when he does lose his girlfriend Linda, the gift he gives her kind of plays throughout the rest of the film as kind of a protective kind of talisman for him. So I like that we have that through line. And I like the interesting shots that even happen with their whole relationship, the kind of fun little game that they're playing as he zooms in on their eyes, just to add some visual interest to, you know, filming such a low budget film. So Sam Raimi really does a lot of interesting kind of zooming and turning and twisting, interesting angles, and using the camera in all kinds of cool and unique ways to really add something to this small film. So I really love those aspects of it. Overall, just how simply the story is told. Then we jump to 1987 with Evil Dead 2. Which is less of a sequel and more of a retelling of the original Evil Dead film. Of course, now with a little bit more of a budget. So we're still working with some really cool, interesting visuals. The story is essentially the same. We have this Necronomicon, this evil book. Reading from the book will bring about these demons. We have a doctor's tapes, just like in the original film, who has found the book and read the words, and ultimately has created possession with his own family. So his wife ends up becoming possessed. We even get a flashback to the doctor and his wife and his daughter and another one of his students who are working on this book and studying it and all of these things. And that's whose cabin they're in. So Ash and his girlfriend, now just the two of them, seemingly like break into this cabin to spend the weekend. We see the picture of the daughter there. We see the tapes there. And ultimately, as Ash is playing the tapes aloud, the words are said, and that's what brings about the demons. The girlfriend's name is still Linda. He still gives her the necklace, that little magnifying glass necklace. So quite a few elements the same, and they kind of rush through the possession aspects to kind of get us to a new point in this movie. So we kind of rush through the things that are familiar from the first film, and then get into new aspects of the film. I love how they up the comedy and make it a lot more campy and really flesh out Ash as a really fun, interesting character, and just really play into the physical acting elements that are so great with Bruce Campbell. He's very talented at physical comedy, at really using his body, and really playing into the silliness of these things, but making it feel interesting and dynamic and not completely ridiculous. You're having fun, you're into it. We get some really interesting, unsettling almost claymation movements of things in terms of how they're animating stuff and doing some of the special effects, which I think is really fun. It's just as gory, and just the Deadite characters in general I didn't really mention when talking about the first film, but what I do love about them is the kind of maniacal taunting, hearing all of these voices just kind of picking at you and taunting you, and calling out all of the things that you're insecure about or the things that you hate about yourself. All the voices kind of chatting at you with all the, it just makes these scenes feel more tense and chaotic and panicked, and you just want them to shut up so you can just have a moment to figure out what's happening. So I love that the Deadite characters really add to the chaos of everything they're seeing.
Shut up!
which in later films don't do as much. So I'll get into that. But even adding to the effects of the first film, we get that same kind of zoom in shot straight to Ash that we get at the very end of the first film. But then it's this crazy kind of spinning shot of him, of a pushing him like through the woods. Very interesting shots. Again, really cool camera work things happening as well, which I really love about this movie. There's a really great fast tracking shot of the kind of floating entity that I talked about that floats through the woods, busting through and following Ash, breaking through the doors as he's kind of running through these tight hallways and moving from room to room. And we're really getting this idea of the space and how quick paced it is without really hitting anything, and just this continuous shot. It's just really cool. Really interesting way to kind of get a layout of the space, and really get into the tense chase action of the film as well. Adding to the camp of the film, we get Bruce Campbell really getting to play into some really fun one-liner dialogue moments and be this really cool character. And this is where we get the chainsaw elements. This is where we get the chainsaw element kind of being an even bigger part of who this character is, and an iconic piece for him. Then when we have the daughter character and some other characters coming in, it just kind of adds to the story. We get more bodies to add on our count. But Ash is still the central focus, and very just rugged feeling, almost like an Indiana Jones type, kind of, the ripped shirt, chainsaw hand, just kind of this epic icon being born in this movie. So I love the build and the growth of his character in just kind of this little short span of how this movie progresses. And even our female character who comes in, the daughter of that doctor, she's a great character as well, and she really puts up a fight, and I love kind of the little team up that happens between her and Ash. I will say I also do like, the fact that even though we rush through the stuff with Linda and that whole relationship, they do take a moment to have the character grieve over it. Because you think, okay, they're rushing past this so we can get to new stuff, and get past what happened in the first film. but I like that they do take that beat to have him really sit and be sad about it. And then we get back into the chaos. It's pretty nonstop. It's constantly moving. Some great effects in terms of him looking in the mirror, and then the mirror version of him kind of pops out. A lot of really cool disorienting things happening with the Deadites. The gore with them, pus and spit and all kinds of blood and craziness happening. Again, some really cool shots. I think Sam Raimi was actually trying to make an effort to make things a little less gory, because he did actually get in quite a bit of trouble with the first film. So, you know, he did try to do some interesting workarounds to make things less gory in terms of using like green kind of goo instead of red blood and stuff like that. And I think those things work. Overall, I love the campy, more comedic tone of the second film. I love that Bruce Campbell gets to do a lot of physical work. The fact that he is able to kind of do the whole thing with his hand, and you really feel like it's not a part of his body. And then he becomes kind of this badass character that we'll get to see going forward. I absolutely love that. It's the creation of the Ash that is so infamous. And now we get into Army of Darkness, the film that I hadn't seen, the one film in this whole franchise that I hadn't seen. So we're getting Army of Darkness in 1992, and I love that these films, like, the continuity is a little bit muddled, but you don't really care and you kind of go with it. We have Evil Dead, and then we have Evil Dead 2 kind of touching on things from the first Evil Dead, but doing it in a different way. And then we have Evil Dead 2 ending with him getting sucked into medieval times. And then we start Army of Darkness in medieval times, but how 2 ended is a little bit different than how Army of Darkness begins. And we get this whole kind of siege tale, which is just a really interesting setting. And we get kind of a bit more of a background for Ash and a whole kind of new story created for him. And I mean, I think I would have watched this sooner had I realized just how hot Bruce Campbell is in this movie, because I was just like, I don't think I really looked at Bruce Campbell like that, but I don't know what was happening in Army of Darkness, but I was just very, very, you know, eyelashes fluttering for Bruce Campbell in this movie.
That one. Groovy.
I loved the kind of man out of time aspects. Bruce Campbell really playing up the comedy, it getting even more silly than Evil Dead 2, so less horror and more silly. This movie is just kind of a whole lot of fun. Ash having to step up to be this kind of hero character, meeting a fair maiden and you know, wooing her, having to fight these skeleton-like demon creatures, him kind of having to do these tests, but we're still dealing with the Deadites that we're familiar with. just having this man out of time in kind of this medieval world is definitely giving like Black Knight, that Martin Lawrence movie, or Kid in King Arthur's Court, just very much 90s kind of storyline, very comedic, but then bringing in the elements of horror that were in those first two Evil Dead films. I kind of had a vague idea of what to expect with this movie, but the fact that it was really campy and comedic and kind of a huge departure from what we had gotten before, I ended up having a lot of fun with it and really falling in love with the character of Ash, and just really had a lot of fun with this movie. Then we move on to the 2013 prequel. I mean, it kind of dances the line between being a sequel to the original Evil Dead films, and it almost a remake because similar things happen, which I like the approach that Fede Alvarez, the director, took with this, saying that kind of the power of the book itself has the ability to replicate a sequence of events. So even if it happens a little bit differently, similar things are going to happen. So when we get kind of all these homages to things from the earlier Evil Dead films, it's kind of a canon event because of the Necronomicon itself. The book itself is creating this repetition of events. I like that I think this movie is the pure embodiment of what a good remake should do. It definitely takes the core story of an original film, but adds its own elements to it to make it something fresh, but still harkens back to the bones of the source material. So I like that we get this brother-sister dynamic. We get an addiction story, which I think definitely plays into the aspects of the possession and the demons. And so when she's, early on getting into this possession taking her over, it is disguised by these detox symptoms. So it takes a minute for everyone to realize what's actually happening to her. We do get our Scotty equivalent character, who's the idiot who reads the book and screws everything up and then wants to, cut and run when things get crazy, even though it's their fault that all of this is happening. So such an infuriating character. But I like the aspect of we're at this cabin to help our friend detox. She, OD'd on drugs, and this is why we're here. Kind of gives them a reason and forcing them to stay, because this time they swore that, we're not going to let her leave this time. We're going to make her stay and detox. The fact that the detox symptoms play into the possession, so it's not clear right away, as I said, what's really happening to her. I will say the issue I did have with the Deadites in this film don't really feel consistent with the Deadites we've seen before. I love them to be more taunting and manipulative and mess with you and like won't shut up and giggling and just messing with you. Whereas these versions of Deadites felt more like zombies, just kind of stalking around and slow moving and twitchy. They felt like they were turning into zombies as opposed to turning into these demonic, taunting beings. So aside from Jane Levy's character, the other characters that end up getting possessed don't really play into that taunting, laughing, wild kind of aspect that I'm used to seeing from these Deadite characters. So that was a bit disappointing. But this movie does really, again, play into replicating a lot of the fun elements that we've seen, but done in a lot more of a serious way. I do like the familial undertones that we're dealing with in terms of this a strained brother-sister relationship. it plays into the character motivations really well in terms of how the brother wants to handle this situation with his sister. He doesn't want to kill her, he wants to try to help her. He hesitates on things because he has this relationship that he's trying to fix and all of that. So I like that the familial dynamic that they add to this story with these characters ultimately plays into how characters will behave throughout the story. Jane Levy is great in this. Um, Especially at the end. I think that's when we get our most kind of campy visuals, because I think, throughout most of the film, it's taking itself pretty seriously. But it isn't until the end where we really play into the camp craziness and the excess of what these movies kind of have a reputation for. The hand ripping off and the sawing the deadite entity in half with the chainsaw and all of that. And just that beautiful shot of the blood kind of splurting and that lighting behind her. And just the covered in red, all of that really felt kind of like it was trying to touch on the campy craziness of what those earlier films were. So I think it's definitely a solid remake that really respects and wholeheartedly the bones of what the original films were. It takes kind of the serious take of the first Evil Dead, adds the intense gore and camp and character development that the second film does really well, while doing its own thing and creating its own story, with the familial themes really fleshing out our characters and creating a lot of interest. So I really liked the story that this 2013 remake was able to craft. It does everything a good remake should do. So then we get into 2023's Evil Dead Rise. As critical commentary is okay for content creators to do during this time of striking, I will briefly touch on my feelings of Evil Dead Rise in terms of how it connects to the rest of the franchise. But we do actually have, Morgan and I have a full review of Evil Dead Rise that we did on the channel when it first came out. So I will link that below if you want to check that out. So just to briefly kind of talk about my thoughts on it and how it fits into the franchise, I will say I liked the opening. I thought it really felt fresh, like a fresh version of what we know of these movies to be. Um, but yeah, Evil Dead Rise, in terms of how it fits into the franchise, I do see it as a weaker one in the franchise as a whole, just because it feels very separate from everything. It does open with kind of the cabin aspect that we're used to from these films. But then we take it to this apartment building, which I think is kind of a cool setting, having to work with this elevator, being stuck in this building, nowhere to go. The isolation of that, I think, is kind of cool. Them giving us a bit of a Shining kind of aspect happening. Um, but I think it's weaker in the familial messaging and familial character moments. That I think are really well done in the 2013 version. I feel like those familiar messages are a little bit more heavy-handed in terms of the aunt, potentially being an expectant mother and having to kind of rise to that occasion because of everything that's happening with her sister and her sister's kids. So I think it feels a little bit forced to kind of have this big kind of message and rising moment for our lead character in this. And it's not as fluid as the kind of familial aspects happening in the 2013 version, I think. There's also a little less of a kind of homemade feel in terms of the effects in the movie that 2013 even was able to kind of have. It feels a little bit more CGI heavy in terms of a lot of the effects, so that is a little bit disappointing. We, of course, get our Scotty, obnoxious character who, despite the warnings, reads the book and causes all this damage. So, very frustrating when we have the character in the film doing nonsense like that. Ultimately, not a terrible film by any means. I really liked that cabin opening and then kind of how it circles back at the end. Lots and lots and lots of blood, which I thought was kind of fun. Um, but ultimately, just not as fun or even, I think, as creative as the other entries in the franchise. So, fairly weak for me. Not really playing into some of the best aspects of the original films and even that newer remake, but not terrible by any means. Generally, overall, I do really enjoy the Evil Dead franchise. I found myself really excited to watch Army of Darkness finally and really having a lot of fun with the campiness of it. I really love that character of Ash, so I think, this little watch through has definitely awakened a desire for me to actually delve into the Ash versus Evil Dead show. I'm told it was really good. And now that I'm kind of really loving that character of Ash and his development through those first three films and even his little nod at the end of the 2013 remake, I kind of want to see him in action again in this show. So, yeah, this was a really fun little watch through. So thank you so much to the patrons for voting for this. I can't wait till next spooky season to delve into another horror franchise. The year before this, I did A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the year before that, I did Friday the 13th. So this was really fun. And happy Halloween, and I will see you next spooky season.